Hey guys, welcome back. Today I've got a generator in the shop here. Customer states it only backfires, it will not start. He was using it, stopped it to put fuel in it, and now it won't start again. So I'm going to get right into the repair here and go through the diagnostic steps with you. Okay, so this machine here has fresh gas. It's got a new spark plug and it won't start. First thing I will check is the oil level because there is a low oil shutoff sensor on these machines. And the dipstick is right here, and that's where you fill it up as well. Lots of oil. It's even dripping. So it's definitely not because it doesn't have enough oil, that's for sure. So I'll try to start it here and show you what it's doing. Whoa. So this is all that's happening, guys. It'll make your ears ring, that's for sure. Now, from my experience, when a generator pops like that or backfires, it's because the valves are not adjusted properly. Now, you might get this too from a bad spark plug, so always replace your spark plug first. Check your oil to make sure there's enough oil. Make sure your fuel valve is on, that you have enough gas. Sometimes too, what I do is I actually take the air filter cover off here, spray some quick start through the carburetor to see if it will start at all. Now, if it starts with the carb cleaner or quick start and then it dies immediately, that means you have a carburetor issue. If it still doesn't run right, you either have a spark issue or a compression issue. Now, the reason I suspect that it is a compression issue or valve adjustment is because when I pull the cord here to do it manually, it's really easy to pull over. It's almost like there's no spark plug installed in the machine. So when that happens, what I do is I remove the valve cover here. There's just 4 bolts. They have an 8mm head. You need to take all these 4 bolts off. Now, these generators here, they're called Benchmark, but they are made in China. And I believe the manufacturer for them is Dukar. Now, the cover will just come right off. And you can reuse the gasket over here. Now, it is easier to adjust your valves if the spark plug is out of the engine. So I'm just going to do that right now and come back and adjust it. And the plug is good. It's brand new. All right, so I've got the valve cover off here and the spark plug's off. It makes it easier to turn the engine over. So what I usually do when I need to adjust the valves on these, or if I suspect that the valves are out of whack and causing the no compression, is I just turn the engine over here by hand. And what I do is I turn it until one valve is fully open or that the rocker arm is right at the bottom here. The furthest it will go inwards. And what that is doing is opening up the valve. And once I have it in this position, I check the valve lash on the other one. I just grab it and move it up and down. And this valve has good lash. I can just tell by experience that it feels good, but I'll get the feeler gauge and show you. Okay, so I've got 2 blades here from the feeler gauge. Usually I set them between 3 to 5 thousandths of an inch. And this one here converts it from the thousandths of an inch to metric. And these are the 2 most common blades I will use. So what I'll do here is run the 3 thousandths of an inch blade in between the valve stem and the rocker arm. Goes in there perfectly. And the 4 thousandths is a little tighter. It's more snug in there, and that's perfect. So this valve is good, no adjustments needed. Now what I will do is pull over the engine just a bit until this valve is all the way down as far as it can go. So we're opening up this valve, this one is closing. Now I will feel this valve, and just as expected, it's super tight, so there's no play between the rocker arm and the valve stem. And I'll show you that with the feeler gauge. Now here's a 2/7" or 0.051 millimeters, and I bet you that won't even go between the stem and the rocker arm. See, it's so tight, it won't even go in. So this valve needs to be adjusted. And you don't need to worry about top dead center on the engine. Just make sure that the one valve is open and then adjust the one that's not open. So what I'll do here is hold the bottom nut. I will loosen the top one. And the way you do your adjustment is by turning this nut here either out or in. So in this case, because the valve is way too tight, I will actually loosen it a bit, check the lash, and it won't take long to start getting that valve lash. Once you think you have the lash, you can run your feeler gauge between it. So I'll run the 0.047" one. And you want it snug in there. You don't want it too tight or too loose. So just snug like this is good. I'm going to leave it there. And now what you need to do is grab your bigger wrench, because you need to hold the nut. It's easy to throw off the valve lash if you're not holding the nut, because sometimes it will turn when you go to tighten up this nut over here. So now I'm just going to tighten up the locking nut. And basically all I'm doing here now is tightening up the adjusting nut to keep it in its place. Then what I do is I turn the engine over again a few times. And I'll check the lash again. And it's pretty snug in there. It's actually a little too snug, but I will try the 0.003" blade here. Sometimes what I do is I adjust it at 0.004, but by the time I've tightened everything up, I'm down to 0.003. However, it's still a bit too tight, so I will go back here and I'm just going to turn out the nut. It'll give us a bit more lash here. And let's see here. It's still a bit too tight, so I'm just going to do that again. And perfect. It's snug in there. Not too tight, not too loose. And I bet you I can fit the 0.004" blade in there as well. And the 0.007" blade goes in there fairly tight, but the 0.003 one, which I had previously, is just nice and snug. Perfect. I'll turn it over again. Again, I made sure that this valve was pushed in or open. And that's perfect. So what I've got here is a used cylinder head, similar to the one on the generator. The reason I took it out is to show you what was happening when that valve was out of adjustment. Now, there was no play between the rocker arm and the valve stem here. It was all tight. So what that was doing is keeping the valve opened up just a bit, just like this. See how open this valve is? And it won't do a proper seal. And then you're not going to have any compression. So it doesn't take much, like not even 0.5 millimeter of this valve being opened up or not adjusted properly will cause the machine to have no compression. So what I've done by adjusting the valve properly, I've made it sit in the seat perfectly so that I can get compression again on that machine. So I'm going to put the machine back together, and I'm pretty sure it's going to start up right away. Now, before I put the cover back on, I just want to explain to you the opposite effect if the valve would have been too loose here. So for example, if the valve lash or the gap had been like massive, what would happen is you would have too much compression. Sometimes the push rods here will pop out of their socket or the place that they're supposed to be in, and then your engine will not start at all. And what I've noticed too, sometimes when the valve lash is too big, people will complain that their machine burns too much oil. And sometimes they'll develop oil leaks, you know, around the cover or from the vent hole from the cover here. They'll notice there's a lot of oil going into the carburetor area. Right here, I mean, and that's because it creates too much pressure and it'll come out of this little vent hose and out where your carburetor is here. But usually what I encounter is always where there's no lash left, and that's usually because the parts kind of break in. All these units here are mostly made in China. The metal is not as strong as those made in Japan. The generators made in Japan, I don't usually have to adjust the valves as often as I do on these cheaper Chinese machines here. So before you put the valve cover on, make sure it's clean here. You can add some gasket sealant if you want. You don't have to with these gaskets here. And when you tighten up these bolts, put them on evenly. So what I usually do is I do it in a diagonal pattern. I just snug them up first and then I go back and tighten them up evenly. And you don't need to tighten them up too much, just use common sense. I'm not sure what the torque specs are, but they're not much. So I'm just kind of snugging the bolts here. And then you can check them back again after the machine's ran for a bit, but make sure the machine is cold when you check the bolts again. All that's left to install is the spark plug. And I like to start these with my hands because it's so easy to cross thread the plug in there. Okay, this will be the moment of truth here. I hope I was right. I've seen this many, many times, but sometimes I'm wrong. So that's all it was, guys. This is a common problem that you will see with all these generic generators like that. They mostly come out of the same factory, even though they're branded differently. If you get that issue, guys, check the valve lash, check your spark plug, and make sure your oil is not too low because there is a low oil shut-off sensor on these. And make sure you've got good gas and that your carburetor is not plugged. I hope my video has helped you today. If it has, please like it and share it with your friends. And I'll see you in my next video. Have a great day.